good afternoon. I'm Chris Knopp, Executive Director of Friends of the Boundary Waters, and this is a very special Lunch with the Friends featuring Amy Freeman. Amy, along with her husband Dave, have written North American Odyssey, right here, this wonderful book about their 3-year travel across the North American continent. We are so very lucky to have Amy here. Her book is Literature Connecting the Importance of the Environment is a kind of a natural connection, that art and literature connecting with the environment. On the past, we've had other authors, Ken Kruger, Carrie Griffith here, and now we're very grateful to have Amy Freeman joining us. A couple housekeeping things before we get started here. Oh, there at the bottom there's a chat button. You may make comments there, and we have a Q&A tab, and you may put questions there. We'll have Amy respond to your questions and respond to your comments as well throughout the program. We'll also allow a period at the towards the end here for more extended Q&A. And so if people want to drop in the chat where they're from, what part of the country or what part of Minnesota you're from, and if there's something in particular you love about the Boundary Waters or your other outdoor adventures, please share that with all of us. Amy Freeman is one of the great explorers. She and her husband Dave were National Geographic's 2014 Adventurers of the Year. She and her husband are also authors of A Year in the Wilderness that chronicles the year that they spent in the wilderness to advocate for protecting the Boundary Waters. Amy is an educator and has educated countless thousands of students, and she serves on the board of Northeastern Minnesotans for the Wilderness and advocating for protecting the Boundary Waters. And so we are so very grateful and honored and lucky to have Amy joining us. And so I'm going to kind of kick this off with a few questions so we get to know Amy a bit more and how she got connected to the environment. And so, Amy, you grew up in St. Paul here, and tell us how you got connected to the environment and to the Boundary Waters.
Yeah, I have my parents to thank for that, actually. So growing up in St. Paul, as probably many of you have experienced, a good place to head for a little vacation is to northern Minnesota. And so we started out doing trips along the north shore of Lake Superior, like staying at various resorts and hotels, and then kind of shifted over to car camping and got braver, started heading up the Gunflint Trail. And then by the time I was about 13, we did our first overnight Boundary Waters canoe trip. And after that, I was hooked.
Super. And then you went to college in McAllister. Did you start going on trips of your own then, or how did you kind of pave your independent path to the wilderness?
Yeah, I did some trips. I sort of like continued doing trips that got longer and harder, like with my parents when I was in high school, and then doing a bit more in college, and sought out a summer job. It was I think it was my junior year, like between junior and senior years, I decided, well, gosh, why not work for an outfitter for the summer? So I worked for Hungry Jack Canoe Outfitters. That was my first exposure to that whole scene.
Great. And after you graduated, you had to make a big decision, right? Well, what kind of path your life would take, whether it be 9 to 5 or something more adventurous. What was your thought process as you made that, contemplated that fork in the road, so to speak?
Oh gosh. I mean, it really was a fork in the road for me because I was on this trajectory, really to kind of stay in academia. So at McAllister, I studied art and psychology, and then I went to grad school in Chicago for art therapy, and thought I would really kind of like be entrenched in that, writing papers and doing studies and working as an art therapist. But the thing is, I met Dave. So between the 2 years of grad school, I was up in Grand Marais working for, I don't know if folks remember it, Superior Coastal Sports. It was located in the building next to the co-op, so what became Stone Harbor. But anyways, we met there. I was working as a kayak guide, and Dave had started the Wilderness Classroom, which is an educational nonprofit organization, and he was kind of looking for office space in town, so he made a little space on the upper floor there, and we got to talking, and like going paddling after work and stuff like that, and really hit it off. And eventually I confessed to him that I wanted to start doing lawn trips. Like with the Wilderness Classroom, the premise is to, like Dave would go on these lawn human powered expeditions and then broadcast to classrooms. And it was sort of before blogging and podcasts were really a thing. He was updating a basic website, sharing photos with the students. They were following along on his journeys, and then like doing presentations kind of before and after the different expeditions. And I thought that was just the coolest thing ever. So I wanted to see how he was making a life like doing that sort of thing. And I told him that I really wanted to kayak around Lake Superior. And I thought maybe I'd end up doing it solo or something. But after we chatted about it for a while, he said, "Well, I think you should do it with somebody." And well, like, why not do it with me? So the two of us kayaked around Lake Superior, and of course, because we ended up making it a wilderness classroom journey, we did it in the fall so that students would be in classes to witness it. So not the most ideal time to go around Lake Superior, except especially like kind of the later part of that as it was getting chilly. But that worked out, and really after that experience, there was no turning back.
Wow. So kayaking Lake Superior in the fall, that is the beginning of an odyssey, isn't it? Well, from there you went to South America, right? On some adventures there. Tell us about what you saw there and what you did in South America.
Yeah, that was the next journey. So we traveled across South America in like three different phases. And we were going from west to east. So we began in Peru and rode bicycles in order to make our way like through the Andes, which there were some hills, so like that, a lot of uphill, and then some crazy, scary like downhill. um, and then eventually we switched to canoes, started like paddling in a tributary of the Amazon, and then got into the Amazon proper and made our way out. And for that, we had a bigger team. So there were 6 people, and they sort of changed throughout each leg. So Dave, Eric Frost and I did the whole journey together, and then had kind of rotating team members. And we were producing a lot of educational content on the Wilderness Classroom at that time, like doing updates basically every weekday. So it was a lot of fun. Oh, and for me, it was my first like international trip, so just kind of learning learning what that experience is like. That was amazing.
Wow. Wow. Well, then that brings us a little bit to your North American Odyssey. So the book itself, which everyone I encourage you to buy, you can kind of here it is, and you can get it in town in Paragus, up in Ely, or you can buy it online. So please buy this and check this out here. Your book really begins with your wedding on White Iron Lake, and so tell us about that. So.
Yeah, well, so this journey, the North American Odyssey, we jokingly called it our honeymoon, because we were taking off on the journey shortly after we got married. But we decided to have a dog sledding wedding. So Dave and I worked at Wintergreen for many years, and it just seemed like Wintergreen Dog Sled Lodge was kind of the the place to do the wedding, and folks like dog sledded to the site on White Iron, and we got married under the pines there. And I mean, really after that, it was kind of frantic preparation for taking off, and we made our way to Bellingham, Washington, where we launched our kayaks.
And you launched it on Earth Day, April 22nd of 2010. So
Yep, that's right.
and so the book and your journey, you break it out into different segments, geographic segments there. That first one, a lot from starting from Bellingham and going up the inside passage there. We have the map depicts it there in red. Tell us about how you prepared for that and how ocean kayaking was different than the kayaking you've done inland.
Right. Um, So, I mean, a lot of our logistics were kind of studying the map and dialing in our route, sort of figuring out our pacing, how many miles we could plan to do on a daily basis. And I'll let you guys in on a secret. And actually, we mentioned this in the book too. So anyone who reads the book will find out that our strategy when we're planning an expedition is to not start out with lawn mileage, because like we're working as we're preparing, like we don't have enough free time to really get our bodies into expedition shape, whether it's sea kayaking or dog sledding or canoeing. And so we start slow and with low mileage, and then we kind of work our way up. And so as we were planning that, we accounted for that. And I think, it paid off. Like for this one, we didn't get tendonitis as we were, or like carpal tunnel or anything like that as we were kayaking. So that worked out. And another big part is like the resupplies, sort of figuring out where we could get food. And we did a mixture of actually like mailing packages to ourselves. So like in that stretch in the inside passage, we had the opportunity to like stop in towns along the way, right? So we mailed things that we knew we couldn't like easily get in grocery stores. And then we did also just sort of the occasional shopping trip in a grocery store. And then of course that got harder in the other parts of the journey where it was more remote. We were really like kind of packing everything for ourselves and figuring out all these different resupply points and coordinating with people to help get them to us and stuff like that. And I guess another part of it too is we were fairly low budget with this, so we didn't plan any elaborate resupplies. Even in the remote stretches, we didn't have any planes like dropping stuff off for us. We managed to figure out whether it was like passing through remote communities or like in the dog sledding, we had a couple instances of someone that we coordinated with like a snowmobile resupply. That worked out quite well.
How many days did you plan for in between resupplies?
Yeah, good question. I'm trying to remember. Like it sort of varied. Um, with kayaking, I think we did carry quite a bit with us at any one point. Uh, like maybe 3 weeks or so. Some other parts like we could have just sort of like every 2 weeks, but then some longer stretches where it was like, oh yeah, it's going to be a month or even over a month between towns.
Well, along that inside passage there, describe the tides because it's like a 14-foot change in water level, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it did vary as we went along, but that was a whole new thing for us. Yeah, I mean, being used to paddling on Lake Superior, we had practice with waves and wind and kind of rough weather, but the tides were something new to us. So just getting used to that rhythm of I mean, there were two factors, sort of like your ability to launch your kayaks and land in certain spots, and how far do you have to carry your kayaks on like slippery kelp covered rocks. Um, but also there were currents created. So all the islands in the inside passage there, as the tide flows in and out, there are currents that will like reverse in direction partway through the day. And so there was a learning curve with that, that's for sure. I think we did uh like decently well at kind of, I mean, it took a little bit, but figuring out that rhythm, strategizing when we would launch and land, and then um we found that we could kind of keep going regardless of which way the current was flowing, because it just sort of meant if it was a favorable current, we sort of treated it like a river, that we'd go out to the middle to take advantage of the current pushing us along. But then as we felt it switch, like there'd be slack tide and then it would be flowing against us, and we could scoot along shore pretty easily, and like stay out of the strongest current, and even catch like there were like eddies sometimes.
Wow. Wow. I mean, you had a couple memorable experiences along that first stretch of your Odyssey there, and we have some images of this. Maybe you want to describe where this particular location is right here.
Yeah, I just such dramatic scenery along the British Columbia coast, and then also as we were getting into Alaska. Um, and I, it's so funny. I actually kind of forget at which spot we took this particular photo. I think that was still like in British Columbia somewhere. But then, paddled like past like Juneau and all sorts of neat spots, even seen some tidewater glaciers.
Super. Now, not all the imagery you saw in these remote areas. Well, let's describe this image here. This was a great one here. Why don't you talk about this one, Amy?
Yeah, you bet. We were getting close to Juneau at this point, and I recall like we had heard humpback whales actually, like when we were at our previous campsite, we could hear them like singing at night. And then as we were paddling, one day uh, we saw them in the distance, and it looked like, oh yeah, maybe they're feeding, like a lot of like their tails, like as they're diving, and then also the spouts of water. And we thought, oh, that's cool, like get the camera ready sort of thing. And never expected to be this close to humpback whales. So as we were kind of floating there, getting our camera ready, these two whales approached us. And let me tell you, they are big. So we both, I think, sort of suppressed a moment of panic where it was just like, are they like they're heading towards us? Like they're moving fast, like on the surface, like, oh my gosh, do they see us? And then it became apparent, well, yeah, they had come over to sort of check us out, and just had this moment. I mean, I think it was a very brief period of time, but to us, like time stopped, and we just floated there in awe of these huge creatures. We were with our friend John Amron, like also in a kayak, and he was just a little bit farther away. So he described being able to see like the whale's eye. It's like we were pretty darn close to the backs of these whales and almost this like overhead view of them. But for John, he saw like this eye kind of like looking around at us. And oh, it was so special. And then, just sort of like, okay, we've seen the kayakers. They turned around and, headed back to whatever they were doing.
Wow. You're checking out the whales and the whales are checking out you. Sort of like, who's there? Wow.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, up there are strict rules. And I mean, especially for folks like in motorboats, you're not to approach the whales. And we were just sort of joking after that, like, okay, we didn't approach the whales, they approached us. Uh,
Great. And you're on obviously big water here. Yeah, how big are your kayaks? How long are they?
Yeah, we were paddling current designs Solstice kayaks. Like Dave had the Solstice GT and I had the Solstice GTS. Both made out of like Kevlar. And oh gosh, I'm gonna be a little fuzzy on their length. I want to say like 17, 18 feet or so
Mhm.
is what they are. So pretty high capacity. We could fit a lot of stuff in the hatches, and for us it was a little odd because it was more than what you would just pack to go on a paddling trip. Because we were doing these updates for the wilderness classroom, we had some technology with us. So we had a small laptop and camera gear, of course, and some batteries that we would be able to recharge with like foldable solar panels. So in kind of calmer conditions, we'd actually like unfold the solar panel like on the backs of our kayak in order to charge stuff up.
Wow. So how heavy were your kayaks then when they were full of gear and supplies at the beginning there?
Well, we never did officially weigh
Oh,
them,
you didn't
but
weigh. Okay.
pretty darn heavy. And usually, for launching, we'd get the kayaks pretty close to the water, empty, and then load them up. But a few different times, it just kind of made more sense to load them in a certain spot and then carry them. And so there were typically like four of us paddling. At one point, one member, Clayton, headed off ahead of us, and so there were three of us. But it would take like three or four people to like pick the kayak up and carry it down to the water if we did have to move it. So
Uh, Quite a lot to move. Quite a lot to move there. Now, these are amazing images here, but you saw some images of, sort of humankind's impact on the environment. And maybe if you describe one of the scenes that you have in one of the coves along the Canadian coast there.
right, this was fairly early on when we were paddling. Just out there on this like remote coastline, right? No houses around, for no towns for a long, long ways, and we were shocked to see the impact that people were having on it. Um, so I'll just read a snippet from the book here. It was as we were paddling, like in the Johnstone Strait, and um, yeah, as we were pulling into a cove, finding a spot to camp for the night. The bows of our kayaks connected with the soft sand, but what had appeared to be a pristine beach deep in the Canadian coastal wilderness from a distance soon transformed into an eerie scene. This remote cove was filled with colorful man-made detritus. How could this be? We were miles from the nearest road or town. Sifting our fingers through the sand revealed a mixture of pulverized plastic and styrofoam, over which were strewn lighters, tangled fishing nets, weathered Croc shoes, tampon applicators, soda bottles, and thousands of other pieces of garbage slowly being degraded by the sun, wind, sand, and water. It took us 5 minutes to clear a garbage-free spot large enough for a two-person tent. John set up his tent on a huge 8-inch thick flat piece of foam, rather than trying to clear a mound of trash. Somehow the water flushing through the Cordero Channel was depositing tons of plastic on this beach, as billions of gallons of water ebbed and flowed with the same steady rhythm that had governed the tides for millennia. How long had this beach been like this? Where did all this garbage come from? Why here? This, where this plastic came from was most likely as varied as the waste itself. Some of it likely reached the ocean from the closest communities or boaters passing through, but some could have traveled thousands of miles in the vast Pacific Ocean's winds and currents from as far away as Asia. All we could grasp at the time was that tides and currents, wind, waves, storms, and calms had turned this quarter-mile long beach into a repository. We were shocked, saddened, and abruptly catapulted from a state of wilderness bliss into humanity's darkest recesses. Once the shock wore off, we pulled out our camera to document this horrific scene and share photos and video clips with the students who were following our journey. They would be as appalled as we were. None of us would ever look at a soda bottle or plastic shopping bag in the same way.
Yeah, it's a really powerful juxtaposition of scenes there with the, all that garbage in the cove there versus the scene that's on the screen right now. It's did this prompt you into activism, scenes like this?
Yeah, definitely. And that's really why we were motivated to write this book. It was a combination of wanting to share some of the beautiful, wonderful things we encountered in the natural world, combined with the sad things we saw. Everywhere we went, there were different environmental concerns that we encountered. So we kind of mixed the two together in the book, right? It's
Mhm.
hopefully as people read it, they kind of experience this rhythm of like, oh, hearing about the the interesting and beautiful things, but then also just kind of the challenges that we face all over. And yeah, for us, it really was a wake up call because we felt like with our work with the wilderness classroom, we were teaching kids about wild places, and the goal was to really just get them excited, get them motivated to get outside. But then kind of felt like, and just as the journey went on, like we were realizing that we wanted to do more to speak up for these places.
Before we move on to the next section of your book here, staying on the coast here, we have a couple questions here. Did you ever consider using a tandem kayak? Where you might have more power and feel more stable on big water.
We did consider it, and it boiled down to two things. So both Dave and I had spent a lot of time like working as sea kayak guides, and so we just knew what it felt like to paddle solo kayaks, and we didn't want to kind of give up that sense of like personal freedom, which is funny because we paddle in a canoe together just fine, but there's just something about kayaking that, like, oh, I'm gonna check this out, well, you go over there, no problem. And then the other thing had to do with just maneuvering a tandem kayak around like on land. If we had to do that carrying scenario, imagine the weight that would be in a tandem, and we didn't really want to be encumbered by that. Like, if we had to, the two of us could like lift like one solo kayak together at a time. But it just seemed like a tandem would be kind of too much to muscle on land there.
And when you're going along the coast there, Amy, what did you do for fresh water? How did you get fresh water on that leg of your journey?
Yeah, we managed to find streams that we could fill up, and we did have quite a few like dromedaries, like a water bag type thing. So we would fill up any chance we got, and we could have a couple days worth of water with us. And that worked pretty well. And of course, anytime we were passing through towns, we could fill up with just, at the tap or whatever. But yeah, we never had an issue finding water. Like there were plenty of streams to fill up from.
And as you're going along the coast here, Amy, you're dealing with a lot of inclement weather and a lot of risk. And how did you prepare for inclement weather? And did your mindset change as you went along? Did you become more tolerant of risk, or how did your mindset change?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, I think um it is important to know your limits. And we probably did, like after some some struggles fighting the wind, like it shifted from not only like, are we going to decide to not paddle if it's dangerous, if it looks like, oh yeah, we could capsize in this or something, right? Like waves that big. We might just decide to stay on shore that day. And I think as time has progressed, we've um, I guess some might say gotten lazy, or perhaps we're just being a little smarter about it, that we don't want to necessarily be in a situation where we're beating our heads against a wall. So we might just skip a day if it seems like the going would be too tough, too slow, So even if it's not like, oh, we feel like it's dangerous, just sort of like, why would we do that? Let's stay in camp.
You're pacing yourself, pacing yourself. There you go.
Right.
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll turn to the next. Go back to the map here for a second here, and kind of point out the next leg for folks as you go inland here. We'll head to the map in one second here. So then the next stage is really kind of along an old, kind of Klondike Gold Rush path in that. And maybe we're moving from, for folks on the screen there, we're kind of moving to the dog sledding area there. And maybe if you talk a little bit about first the hiking and the excuse me, the hiking, then the paddling as you went to the Arctic, that stretch here.
Yeah, so hiking the Chilkoot Trail, that was fun. And then as we got into the Yukon, and made our way like to Dawson. So we paddled on it's this mixture of like going by foot, right, hiking, and then paddling again, and hiking through Tombstone Territorial Park, which, oh my gosh, talk about wilderness. Like that was some phenomenal hiking, very challenging. Like going up and over a couple mountain passes, and also just total bushwhacking at times. And then some more paddling, and we got into the Mackenzie River. And then at that point we turned south, so upstream on the Mackenzie for a little bit, until we got to the point where we would transition to dog sledding. And so like kind of between that, like that upper yellow line where it goes like this, and the blue with the dog sledding, we took a little
Mhm.
break. So we came home, um, trained up some dogs, worked on like presentations for the kids, and then I took off again with two more people, two folks from the Ely area, Ellen Root and Van Conrad, and 12 sled dogs.
Well, yeah, and when you were preparing for this sled dog portion of your journey, you had to kind of contemplate how many dogs to take. And so when you're kind of what's your thought process? Because you need to, consider a lot of variables, food and all those other items along that part.
Right. Yeah. And this was a big debate, because in a way, when you're working with sled dogs, like the more dogs you involve, the more potential for chaos.
Yeah.
And the other factor there is needing to transport like all the food for those dogs. And so in some ways, it's possible the most efficient way to travel would have been like one dog per person. So like a total of four dogs or something. But we as we were planning this and we began coordinating with schools along the way. So like schools in remote First Nations communities there, we were just like, gosh, we want to be able to give the kids dog sled rides. And we can't do that if we're just traveling with a pulk and one dog per person, right? And so that resulted in us saying, okay, so dog sleds, we're committing to dog sleds. And we settled on like 6 dogs per team, like having 2 teams. Um, and like just felt like we could be sort of more agile that way, like going on trails and stuff. Because it wasn't all just sort of wide open travel, not like up in the Arctic where there, no trees or going over sea ice and you could have a huge team and like one big sled or something. Even though we did eventually, at one point in the journey as we're traveling on some of those big lakes, we figured out like how to hook up all 12 dogs and then had the sleds in a train. Like that was super efficient when we could do it, when it was nice and wide open. Yeah,
Well,
so here we
that would
are giving a dog sled ride.
well, talk about some of the people that you met along the way here. Some of the schools and some of the memorable people that you met on this dog sledding leg of your journey here.
Yeah, we were met with such warmth in these places. It was amazing how people would open up their homes to us and share a meal and a chance to just like sit down over tea and share stories. And in some of these communities, like dog sledding really had been a way of life. And then there was this transition to traveling by snowmobile, which was interesting. As we would roll into a community, we'd get, both the kids like all excited to see us, but then elders would come down and tell us about how they remembered having the dogs and caring for the dogs, like feeding them. And I remember one woman talking about how her husband would, like now he goes out and runs a trap line with a snowmobile, and she worries about him when he's away. And when he had a dog team, she never worried because she knew the dogs would look after him. It's like a dog team doesn't break down, but a snowmobile can break down. So that was interesting to hear about. And there was one man who really just some of the stuff he told us really resonated with us. So we like one like government entity that was super helpful for us as we were figuring out our resupplies, environment and natural resources in the Northwest Territories. There were a couple of different spots where we got connected with like the local shorten it like DNR, ENR, Environment and Natural Resources. We get connected with the ENR officer. And so when we were in the town of Delaney, we coordinated a resupply by snowmobile with Leroy, who was at the ENR office. And as we were planning our journey and where he would meet us and stuff, we showed up at his office and he put the kettle on for tea and we sat down and poured over the maps and talked about our plan. And eventually, the conversation broadened. And I'll just share with you another passage from the book that really captures something we learned and really took with us from meeting Leroy. Having covered the necessary logistics about our route, the conversation shifted. Sled dogs have all been replaced by snow machines, but caribou remain an important source of food for the Dene. Leroy explained that the caribou numbers had been steadily declining, leaving scientists and locals alarmed. Things were changing so fast, and the loss of the caribou seemed like another slash in the Dene's cultural fabric. Looking up from the map, Leroy said, "When you travel by dog team, you see every rock, every tree. The land speaks to you. You can hear the land." His eyes took on a glossier sheen as he continued. "Now the young people always have their headphones on and they're staring at screens, TVs, and playing video games. When they go outside, they race around on skidoos or in trucks. They can't hear the land and they feel lost. They have lost their purpose. I've been a hunter all my life, being out on the land, bringing back food. That's my purpose. That is what I know. When I was a kid, if I had a couple of fish hooks and a little string, I felt rich. We would spend all day out fishing and we were proud to bring home food." He took a sip of tea before saying, "Things have changed so much."
Yeah, that's very powerful, Amy. And listening to the land, it's that those are words to really internalize. That's really powerful. And how many miles did you go by dog sled? How long was that stretch for you?
Yeah, that was about 900 miles.
100 miles. Wow.
Yeah.
And what
So
was the
we
the longest stretch you were without contact with other humans, would you say? I mean, for the whole journey. How about that? So,
Hmm. I think it was sort of after that dog sledding stretch when just Dave and I were canoeing. Um, there was a 6 week period in there.
mhm. Wow. This is an interesting image. It's um, tell us about this place here.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I said just Dave and myself, but really we had a third team member, Fennel, one of our sled dogs, accompanied us for that as well. And it just it was a funny thing deciding to take Fennel canoeing. This was one of the things we would do on the wilderness classroom is give students a decision to make for us, sort of like a choose your own adventure book. We'd pose a question to them, have them vote, and like whatever they voted on, like okay, that's what we do. And one of those was Fennel joining us because we knew after the dog sled journey it was time for him to retire, and so the question was like, do we find a friend who will take him, or do we bring him canoeing with us? And he did great. He loved it. I mean, he was older but still able to walk with like his little backpack and stuff. Very comfortable following us along on the portage trails. But then he'd also enjoy just napping in the canoe with his head resting on a gunnel. And so this is, what some of the portages looked like. So no defined trail. If we were lucky in some spots, if the woods were denser, like occasionally we'd find like blazes in trees where someone hacked with an axe or flagging. But there was kind of a lot of bushwhacking, and when it was wide open like this, we felt pretty lucky. It was fairly easy going at this point.
Wow. The now you here's another great image here. Tell us about this one.
Yeah, well, the thing about taking Fennel, he weighed just under 100 pounds or so at that point, and like adding his weight into the canoe, plus ourselves, plus the equipment and the like human food, we realized like, gosh, we can't haul enough dog food for him. And we knew we wanted to like supplement our own diets with fish. And so we decided that Fennel would live primarily off of fish. Like we had some dog food along, just kind of normal like dried kibble, and then also lard, like to make sure he was getting enough fat. Um, and gosh, he grew to love fish. Like anytime Dave would pull out the fishing pole, Fennel would just be right there, like right next to him. And a few times we would fish from the canoe and trolling or something, but we kind of ended up stopping that because Fennel would get so excited. We were worried he was gonna like tip over the canoe if Dave caught a fish and he lunged for it or something. Right? But it worked quite well, like where we were traveling there, it was super easy to catch fish. So no problem there.
So you canoed from the Northwest Territories all the way to Grand Portage. So that brought you through the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. And here's another beautiful image from that stretch. And tell us about this stretch that takes in the landscape that many of our listeners are familiar with as well.
Yeah, it really felt like a homecoming for us, even though it was in the middle of the overall expedition, but it was the end of one phase of it, and so it just felt so good to reach the Boundary Waters. And we had our friend Brian Hansel join us, and he actually took this photo. So we were really grateful to have him along, like documenting that portion of the journey, and also just the camaraderie. Like it amplified the sense of a homecoming because, like, here we are, just kind of casually paddling along with our friend, and it was late fall as we were passing through, so getting pretty chilly, and all the leaves were off the trees at that point, but really kind of my favorite time of fall is when the tamaracks are golden like this. So that felt extra special. And I think we observed, like in Canada as we were making our way down, that it's like you don't have big white pines extending like very far north out of the Boundary Waters. Like we are really lucky where we have this Laurentian mixed forest, and I was struck by that it's like we went from the land of like stunted black spruce trees to like the towering white pines again. So that um, really added to the specialness of that time, and the little luxuries. So like a Boundary Waters campsite having the fire grate and latrine, that was a bonus. That felt very luxurious.
Great. And you mentioned that you had at various stages people accompany you, and so this was Brian Hansel, the photographer out of Grand Marais, that took this nice image here. So
Yep. Yeah, we
s-
were lucky to have him for that point because actually, as we got to the end of that, so like our very last night, we were camped, at the top of the Grand Portage,
Mhm.
and the Northern Lights came out in spectacular fashion, like more color than I mean, I had seen plenty of like Northern Lights with that were greenish, right? But that night there was red in the sky, and I think he was much more skilled at capturing it than Dave and I would have been. So it was extra special. Like felt like this homecoming as we were spending our last night out there, and then came down the Grand Portage the next day and ended right on the shore of Lake Superior, ready to kind of take another break for the winter, and then we'd start up again by kayak in the spring.
and this kind of leads to that that leg that goes down to the Key West. Explain kind of that journey eastward generally, then south, and some of what you encountered on that leg.
Right. The trip did change in nature in a way. I mean, we still really enjoyed our time like along the north shore of Lake Superior as we made our way out. But then as we came down the East Coast, it was kind of like, okay, more population centers, like it very urban in nature. And yep, paddling through New York City, like past the Statue of Liberty. Um, uh, but we decided to include the East Coast in our journey Well, partially because we wanted a whole line across the continent, but also because we thought, oh, we'll visit schools along the way. So we coordinated um, all these like school assemblies, and then also with various paddling clubs and kayak shops and stuff like that. So I'm kind of ramping up the publicity, doing presentations, just kind of uh, sharing stories about our journey and spreading the word about how important all the natural spaces are.
Well, along this stretch, Amy, you encountered Hurricane Sandy, one of the those seminal events. Tell us about the lead up and aftermath of encountering Hurricane Sandy.
Oh yeah. So we were just south of New York City. We had gotten to Barnegat Bay, New Jersey, and we did a presentation like in conjunction with a local kayak shop there and the owners like Bill and Carmen. Um, like after we'd spent the night at their house and did this presentation, and they said, you might want to consider sticking around for a few days. Like uh, Hurricane Sandy hadn't really been on our radar, but they were well aware of it and sort of warned us like we probably don't want to be out camping when when this hits the coast. And so they graciously let us stay with them. Until like they lived very close to the water, and so actually their neighborhood got evacuated, and then they helped coordinate a place for us to stay with friends like a little farther inland. But it just, I mean, oh, it was a scary experience. Like neither of I, like Dave and I both grew up in the Midwest, and so neither of us really knew too much about hurricanes and what to expect with flooding and everything. So we prepared, like we helped them prepare as best we could at the kayak shop, like kind of securing everything that was outdoors and bringing valuables like to higher ground basically, and then waiting out the storm. Um, and the place we were staying, I remember it was, blustery and rainy and we were all just staying inside, and eventually the power went out, and we did experience this odd calm in the middle of it all. Like you know how that works with a hurricane, like the eye passes over and calm for a little bit, and then the wind picks up from the other direction. So the eye went right over us there, and then afterwards, we returned to meet up with Bill and Carmen and found out that their building had flooded, and there was a lot of damage. Just so much debris had washed into their area where the kayak shop was. So we stuck around kind of longer than, I mean, obviously longer than we expected to help with the cleanup. And then once we started up again paddling, we just saw the devastation continue down the coast. Um, uh, Debris everywhere, and sort of wondering about like what kind of chemicals were washing into the water as a result of it, like big boats skewered on pilings, and seeing a boatyard where like sailboats that had been stored up on the ground had all just like tipped over, and so much devastation.
Yeah, that's it sounds incredibly sobering to harrowing to experience it, and then seeing that devastation that that the impacts of climate change also include this, the sort of release of all this into the natural world. It's just astounding to contemplate.
Hmm.
And so
Yeah, and
you
just wondering about rebuilding, like does it make sense to rebuild in some of these places that are prone to disasters like that?
and so you conclude in Florida there and along that stretch there. Maybe talk a little bit about what it was like to finally complete this and what it meant to you and to Dave.
Yeah, I mean we spent 3 years, right? It was like 12,000 miles, 3 years of our lives, making our way towards Key West. We had this one goal in mind, and we had finally gotten there. And it's a little funny to admit that in some ways it was like we almost didn't believe we were done, like what comes after that. We were just so used to the routine of paddling that it was surreal, and we just sort of in many ways wanted to keep going. And honestly, it's how we felt after we finished our year in the Boundary Waters, that we could happily just stay out there. Like we love the simplicity of being on a journey like that. And really life is boiled down to the basics, to the important things, and kind of all that unnecessary stuff sloughs away. So a little tough to return back to civilization.
Right. And you continued your adventures after that. Then you had your year in the wilderness, and you've had subsequent adventures. And I think it was this North American Odyssey that kind of connected you with sailing. And maybe you want to talk about how you spend your winters, and maybe that sort of rhythm that you have with that.
Yeah, it was like during that journey coming down the East Coast, seeing sailboats and kind of being curious about that lifestyle. Like, oh, that's pretty neat. These people are moving around, but they're not like burning calories to do it, right? Like the wind is propelling them in their sailboats, and it can be um, a little more comfortable, right? You don't have to set up camp every night. It's sort of like glamping if you're on the move, just like with your home, right? And so after we finished the journey, that's when we got our first sailboat on Lake Superior. Managed to buy a boat from a couple of friends and learn about sailing and just kind of slowly progressed from sailing around near Grand Marais to making our way out to the East Coast and like to the Bahamas. That was kind of our first foray into sailing. And at this point, we've kind of settled on a seasonal rhythm of traveling with the sailboat in the wintertime and then returning to Minnesota for the summers. So I'm in Ely right now, like working at Ely Outfitting Company, and Dave is guiding. So that's just kind of worked out for us with the rhythm of things. And then the wilderness classroom, like during COVID, we shifted our model to doing like like we are right now, like a Zoom with schools. So we can do those presentations from anywhere. So it works really well to do that on the sailboat, and we have solar panels to charge everything, and so we can kind of perpetually do that while we're traveling on the boat. So we really like that.
Fantastic, fantastic. Now, do you have plans for any more book tours or anything like that? There were some questions about that from our audience here.
We have a few presentations coming up. We have just been chatting with like the folks at North House Folk School. Like if people make their way to the Wooden Boat Show, we'll be there this summer. And some other events that are kind of in the works for like around the Twin Cities.
Great. There's some fans of yours in Madison, Wisconsin. Any plans to get to Madison, Wisconsin?
Ooh, nothing definite, but if you have any ideas, let me know.
And it's so the discipline to write is really something. Uh, with what are you contemplating for potential future writings? There's a question about that is from the audience as well.
Right. Well, we could go one of two ways. So, I mean, the funny thing is the North American Odyssey occurred before we spent the year in the Boundary
Right.
Waters, right? And that was our first book, and then we moved backwards in time a little bit. So we could go backwards even more and write about the Trans Amazon expedition, is what we called the journey in South America. So possibly that. But then something I've been mulling over is maybe writing about sailing. I mean, that would be a ways in the future that we get something out, but that would potentially be like kind of more like short stories, because we um, don't have any kind of one journey with that I think is worthy of a book just yet, but we'll see.
Why super? Why super? So everyone, the book is North American Odyssey, and you can see Amy this summer at Jason Zaborski's outfitting shop there off of Sheridan. And it is I'm so grateful for your generosity of time, Amy, and for everyone on the line. We dropped it in the chat that we will have a recording that we'll share out with everyone. So this is we do these lunch with the friends. We started this during the pandemic to connect with people, and it's a really wonderful way to explore all these inspiring stories that Amy and others have with the wilderness. We also have other ways of connecting with people, and we have a few things I just wanted to share with our audience before we signed off here. So we have a couple things coming up. Our next lunch with the friends will be actually next Wednesday, a week from today, with Senator Tina Smith. There's an adventure going on right now in Washington, D.C. Involving the threats to the boundary waters, and Senator Tina Smith is at the front lines of that fight, along with Congresswoman Betty McCollum and other boundary waters champions, Kelly Morrison, Congressman Kelly Morrison as well. And so that'll be on May 28th, a week from today. We just dropped into the chat where you can sign up for that one, and we'll have other interesting episodes coming up as well. And we have a few events that wanted to put on your radar screen as well, in addition to this lunch with the friends with Senator Tina Smith. We have our fall event coming up on October 11th, and right now it's not an event, but it's kind of a movement. I tell our team here that to meet the moment here, we're trying to create a movement. And so we have a Clean Water Coalition meeting coming up on May 28th at 6 o'clock. So you can contact my colleague Maggie for that. And if you want to be part of the Northwoods Gala, you can contact our colleague Ramisha, and that again is in the fall in October. So the wilderness is about all those amazing things of connecting with nature, but it's also about connecting with ourselves and other people. And Amy, thank you for providing that insight of your 12,000-mile odyssey across North America. We are very grateful to you, and again to everyone that was on today's lunch with a friend. We're grateful for you as well. So we're in this together. And Amy, have a wonderful afternoon up in Ely, and everyone on the line have a wonderful afternoon as well. Thank you so very much. Bye-bye.